single feast days, but feast seasons, festival seasons. There is Advent at the beginning of the Christian year. And then there's Christmas, and Christmas, contrary to popular belief, does not just last one day, but in the renewed form of the sacrament, 12. And there's Epiphany, which again lasts a matter of 4 Sundays. This first group of 3 festivals has to do with the mystery of how mankind comes to be out of the Godhead. Out of God we are born. The mysteries of God the Father find a threefold expression in Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany. Then the mysteries of God the Son find their most central experience for the Christian congregation in the festivals of Passion, or in its broader sense, Lent, in the narrow sense, Passiontide, intensifying toward Holy Week. And secondly, Easter. And thirdly, Ascension, the death and resurrection of Christ. And then the mysteries of God the Spirit are hinted at in those still undeveloped festivals of Pentecost, St. John's Tide, and Michaelmas. And within each group, there is again a differentiation into Father, Son, and Spirit, which you may want to try to work out on your own. That's the archetype as Rudolf Steiner gave it in 1922 and 23. It should also be said, parallel to this, we have the popular manifestations of these festivals in their more or less half understood traditional fragments in the different parts of the world. In America, where I grew up, as Gordon mentioned, Christmas begins the day after Thanksgiving, doesn't it? That's the day when you go into the stores and everything is suddenly red and green. And on the intercom system, there are the inescapable Christmas carols for a whole solid month, and ends on Christmas Day. The 12 days of Christmas are in America at least no longer really a thing of consciousness. It ends with the 25th. So there's a whole separate cycle of the year for the advertising agency and the greeting card agency. And I knew someone who had been married to a man who worked in the greeting card agency, and he told us that they have a whole calendar of their own. There's the Valentine's Day season, that lasts for weeks. There's the graduation and Father's Day season, and there are all of these different seasons. In countries that do not have Thanksgiving, in America, Thanksgiving is the end of November, for those of you who don't know the customs there. And that's the only thing that's preventing us from hearing Christmas carols even earlier, because first the Thanksgiving season has to end. Countries that don't have that, they lack this buffer. In Canada, for instance, where a weaker form of Thanksgiving is celebrated sometime around Columbus Day, there Christmas starts the day after Halloween. I lived there for a while and I was astonished. I went on November 1st to the mall for some unfathomable reason and was barraged with Christmas carols and Christmas kitsch. And have you noticed that this year it's different again? The central festival, the actual Christmas gathering, the shared meal, such as you find in Dickens, the human connectedness, and in many parts of the world, even the singing, has been banned. There's a whole Ahrimanic spirit, which is laying itself like a mantle of fear around earthly humanity in our day. And we don't have to accuse any earthly people of intending this, but simply by being locked into a system of interlocking cogwheels, a, a medical, pharmaceutical, legal, military, political system involving the hospitals and the insurance agencies and everyone else and the police. People are put in a position of following through a certain type of materialistic thought to its logical conclusion, and essentially banning Christmas as a central festival. You can still celebrate on the internet with the recorded Christmas carols. But in Germany, for example, you're not allowed to get together with people and sing them in real life. You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch, would be the summary of that procedure. It's an embattled festival, and it was even before the current hype about infection. Have you ever noticed how many Christmas songs avoid Christ? Santa Claus is coming to town. Have yourself a merry little Christmas. The most wonderful day of the year. White Christmas. Jingle bells. Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer. Frosty the snowman. And again, speaking from American culture, I have to observe the degeneration of the spirit of Christmas over the course of the centuries. There's a conflation in the Santa Claus figure with St. Nicholas, whose feast day is really December 6th, and who originally is a noble and worthy Greek bishop. But his bishop's mitre and his regalia have morphed in popular culture to a suit of pajamas with a floppy cap, with a floppy nightcap. And the noble Greek saint has become an obese American flying through the air on a sled drawn by reindeers with glow-in-the-dark noses and corrupting the youth with materialistic gifts, which he funnels into the privacy of your home by means of a chimney. These are phenomena of kitsch, of sentimentality, which descends to a cartoon-like anti-artistic level. That's why it seems worth noting even the meaning of Christmas is questionable. And in the centuries recent, when it still had more or less wholesome traditions, it was again something different from what it could be today in the best sense. It was a commemoration of a birth that took place 2,000 years ago. One looked to the past. And so maybe it is not entirely lamentable only that these traditions are being lost. It makes room for something new to come about. And Christmas in the age of the second coming would mean we no longer look merely to the past, but we ask ourselves, what is happening now? How does Christ in the etheric realm, to use the anthroposophical term, That is, how does Christ in the present, when he is not visible in a single earthly incarnation, bring forth the festival of Christmas each year? What happens? Amidst all of the commercialization and hype, there is an awesomeness to the night of Christmas itself. And if you don't become completely inebriated, you can feel that. And people who would probably say that they have no interest in things religious or don't even take things seriously that cannot be grasped with the senses, even these people can find themselves like Scrooge, touched by something of the reality of that night. It's not so easy just to make it disappear. Something happens beyond the level of sense perceptible experience. From realms of grace, a deed of salvation enters our world regardless of our inability to take it up in our consciousness. From the highest worlds, something comes into our humanity. At the turn of the ages, it was the birth of a child. When a child is born, he chooses his body with the help of the guardian angel. He influences the preparations for his own incarnation. It, the soul of the child, before it even becomes a boy or a girl, works into the sequence of generations. And the more significant the incarnation is intended to become, the longer in advance the incarnating child engages in the physical becoming of the bodily sheath nature. The angels accompany this process. And once the child has begun to take hold of its body in conception or in the weeks following conception, and is then born and begins to grow and live in this body, the body serves the soul of the child as a realm in which the child can have his own experiences, his very own. And the older the child grows, as it grows to become a teenager and an adult, the more the experience condenses all of the others, the other things of this world, and the other people as well. They are not my body, and they are not in my body. They are outside. This is a fundamental experience which we need in order to come to ourselves, the separateness. In the world between death and a new birth, we are not separate. The beings of spirit interpenetrate one another. There's no privacy there. When we think true thoughts, our thinking is at one with all of the people around the world who succeed in thinking the thoughts truly. And Rudolf Steiner goes as far as to say The human soul, after passing through all of those experiences between death and a new birth, gets fed up ultimately with continually merging with all of the other beings around it, and longs to be alone at long last. And that leads to the desire to reincarnate. Now we have our own body and we have our own experiences, inner soul experiences, our own secret thoughts and feelings and wishes, which we may or may not choose to express to the others. That's my inner life. In the first coming of Christ, the great spirit of the whole world went through this process of isolation. In the second coming, Christ does not live in a single human body anymore, but in all of the beings of the earth. Christ is becoming the spirit of the whole earth, and that includes all of the animals, all of the plants, even the mineral realm, the oceans, the clouds, and all of us as well, quite regardless of what we may or may not think of this reality and how aware we may be or unaware. That means the principle of isolation has in our time begun to loosen. For the last several decades, somewhat less than a century now, the phenomena have begun to grow, which show that it's not entirely true when we say, those are my thoughts and my feelings only. And it's actually not that difficult to notice this. With a little bit of open-minded introspection, you can find that your inner thoughts and attitudes, your sensations, your fears and wishes, in short, your whole inner life has a profound effect on the other beings around you. It's a little bit jarring to notice that at first, because it means that cherished, unassailable tower that you thought you were is beginning to open. We're no longer entirely isolated. And the exercises given in the central book of schooling in anthroposophy, how to know knowledge, how to know higher worlds, or how does one attain knowledge of higher worlds? There are various translations available. Part 1, as Rudolf Steiner wrote on the title page of all of his editions. These central exercises, they frequently serve to develop an awareness for this. Drastic comparisons are brought. For instance, if you just think whatever thoughts come to mind, it's the same thing in the astral realm as it would be in the physical realm if you took a rifle and fired random shots about a room with your eyes closed. It's not without effect. And perhaps in reaction to this opening of the souls, people have begun to lay extraordinary value on the so-called private sphere in recent years. There's a craze about concealing your identity. Obviously, part of that is encouraged by a craze about revealing everything. You can go on the so-called social media and tell everyone from minute to minute what you're having for breakfast and what street you're walking on right now. And we have the transparent human soul made of glass. And as a counter reaction to that, I would assess that as a materialistic caricature of the second coming. Because the second coming, it doesn't really, in this proper sense, mean that Christ left and is returning. It means that we're coming back to the point where we can notice what is happening in reality. We're opening organs of perception. And that means the armor has chinks in it now. And probably that's also part of the explanation for people's astonishing willingness to enter into the latest trend of so-called distancing, social distancing, as it's called in a type of oxymoron. That you avoid contact, you don't touch people, you don't shake people's hands, you don't kiss people, you don't hug, you don't share meals together unless you're married or something. You wear a mask. This too is a type of a throw of an outgoing mode where we were separated within our own sheaths. That's beginning to loosen. And one of the central statements of the age of the second coming is a prophecy that we find in the gospel. Christ himself speaks of our present time and says there will come a time when the people will again be able to experience my presence. And one of the signatures of this time will be this experience. Everything that you've ever said or done to the least of my brethren, you have done unto me. This is one of the words in the gospel that Christ himself speaks in relation to the time of his reappearance in the etheric world. That is, in relation to our time. The illusion will fall away that these things are somehow compartmentalized. And Christ, who is a being of infinite co-experiencing and compassion, a being of the infinite capacity for entering into the other beings, begins to experience in all of the greatest and least of our brethren, and obviously that includes sisters in the old-fashioned terminology, and in all of the beings of the world, really, how we work upon them. He experiences that. That means it's now a question being put to us. The Christmas question. How can this being enter into our humanity and into the world under the present conditions? And that depends on what experiences he has at our hands through the souls of all of the sisters and brethren, that is, of all of the beings. Rudolf Steiner makes this more specific still. He speaks of 3 sheaths into which Christ is being born in the present. Our bodily nature does not only consist of a physical sheath, there is also a life body and a sentient body, or sometimes called astral body. Those are the technical expressions for the zones in which our center of being dwells, and through which the center of our being, our I, experiences and works in the world. And so too the great cosmic I of the Christ himself is entering into an astral sheath, a soul body, which consists of people's capacity for awe and wonder, according to the spiritual findings of Rudolf Steiner. That is, whenever we go out into the world and meet new experiences, or if you're advanced, old experiences, there's an opportunity to stop for a moment and marvel. Instead of saying, yes, I know that, there's a term for that, it's called this, this, and this, and that covers it. And thereby suppressing the opening experience, we can stop in awe of what it is that's being presented to us. This faculty for wonder, innate in every child, can be cultivated consciously by adults and becomes a soul sheath for the being of Christ. Because the first step toward co-experiencing with all of the other beings is the opening. And our lives are filled with so many experiences, and sometimes in rapid succession, especially if you live in a large city, that perhaps the heart is too small to stop at every moment and marvel and open up. I know I can't manage it, but on the other hand, you could practice it once in a while if you want to. And know that it prepares you to open for new things and to perceive dimensions of existence which otherwise you simply pass by and shut out. That is the meaning, in fact, of religion in the original sense of the word. It does not mean a set of dogmas which you have to believe in or a set of practices by which you must live, but it means in Latin connecting. Connecting not by outward bonds, but by inner bonds. And you can manage to connect with all kinds of things in life. This faculty of astonishment is one such means. The ancient Greeks knew it as the beginning of all knowing, that you first have to stop and marvel if you're going to learn anything. Conversely, we may say, he who has forgotten how to marvel cannot in a deeper sense learn. It is into this zone of the human soul that the Christ is first born. And it's a work in progress. It's not just done once and for all. The second zone is the life body. And there, Rudolf Steiner says, you will find these statements, for example, in the lectures on theosophical morality and elsewhere as well. Rudolf Steiner mentions the faculty of compassion. That is, by cultivating an ability to feel feelings which do not originate in our own subjective affect, but to enter into the feeling life of other ensouled beings. We begin to develop life forces which weave an etheric sheath for the second coming of Christ in its Christmas aspect, in its birth aspect. And thirdly, there is even a physical sheath prepared. We must not think that that means a material body that's 6 feet tall and limited to one spot on the earth. Physical, in the broadest sense, includes more subtle workings as well. But Rudolf Steiner uses the word physical body to describe that zone into which the Christ being can enter when people take responsibility. Conscience, he calls it. The organ by which we find deeds which we want to do because we know that is mine and that is my contribution and it's on me. This sense of identifying with the needs of the world and freely taking them on as my own contribution can be called conscience. These three sheaths, they go deeper. They begin with the more conscious realm of awe, and they descend into the feeling realm where the compassion weaves between one breast and another. And then they descend into the realm of deeds in the conscience, which takes hold of the will. Threefold man is woven there, not in a single physical shape in space, but in an archetype spanning all of humanity. And we find something of this same mystery in the brief descriptions which Rudolf Steiner gives when he gives a tour of the Goetheanum in progress. He will take the people and show them, or if he's outside of Dornach, he'll show slides even sometimes of the statue that he made. I want to try to show you some pictures because there that's not what I wanted. How about this one? There we go. Are you seeing this now? Not yet. Carola is nodding. Thumbs up.
Yes.
If you can see it, the others must be seeing it too. It's a photograph of the head of this statue. Many of you will know this statue. Rudolf Steiner usually called it the representative of man, or the representative of humanity. Now, he said of this statue that it shows these qualities of awe, compassion, and conscience. And he said the attempt was made to show in the realm of the forehead the forces of wonder and awe. In the middle of the countenance, in the eyes, in the gaze, and then in the nose, the forces of compassion. In the lower part, with the mouth and the chin, the jaw, the power of conscience, or we could also say taking responsibility. He said this mouth was not intended for eating, but for taking on a task in the will. What if I were to try another one? You see that one also? No. Still nothing?
No, not yet.
Is the first one gone?
No, it's still there.
Huh. All right. In that case, stop sharing and share anew. Sorry, I'm not that gifted with all of these practical things. Try this one. How about now?
Yes.
All
We can.
right, same statue, new picture, different photograph, just from a different angle. Because statues are three-dimensional, you have to see them from multiple angles. Here, I think you can also see the threefoldness of the face. Every human face has this threefoldness. There is something of the thinking quality in the realm of the forehead, also outside the forehead. There's a light process outside and around the upper part of the head of any human face. And there's something of the feeling quality in this middle realm where all of these sinuses are and the openings are, and the ears and eyes and the nose. And the strength or weakness of the jaw is also felt to express something of the will character, where the head becomes mobile and active, and the word also acts and creates events in the world. What? Why am I seeing this? Confusing. Stop share. Okay. I'm going to show maybe 2 or 3 more if I can. Just another photograph of the same statue. Representative of humanity means Christ in the age of the second coming enters into our humanness as such. And to the degree that we develop humanness, the Christmas event is possible. Christ has chosen the earthly body in which he would dwell, and it's the body of the earth as a whole and of humanity as a whole. Do you see this third picture? Just so you see it from different angles. That's the only thing. Another angle, an older photograph. It looks remarkably different from the different angles. Awe, compassion, and conscience. You might think the eyes would be the most waking expression of our thinking life. But the eyes, better said, the gaze, which meets us when we look into another person's eyes, is something of the soulful connectedness and makes it possible to share in the life of feeling. Here's one more picture to show that Rudolf Steiner also painted this same figure. He didn't only sculpt it. This is a black and white photograph of the painting, which was in the middle of a whole panorama of many figures. on the ceiling of the small dome above the stage, above the niche where the statue was intended to stand. As you can see, it is by no means Christmas kitsch. We're not dealing with cute baby Jesus here, to put it mildly. You can be shaken when you look into the depth of pain in this gaze, which shares in the experiences of the entire world and of humanity and all the destinies connected with that. All right. We can say that connected with these three sheaths in which the being of Christ incarnates in the present Christmas event are three mystery currents that work in more or less in the background of historical becoming. For a sheath to be prepared at the turn of the ages into which the Christ could incarnate, different streams had to come together. And probably many or all of you have already come across the idea offered to us by Rudolf Steiner that more than one child was necessary to prepare for the incarnation of Christ, which really happened in the fuller sense, beginning with the baptism in the Jordan. These different children and these different preparations, they go way back into the deep past. And the one current has to do with Zarathustra, who is the prehistoric initiate founder of the ancient Persian culture. Not to be confused with Zarathustra, who is the same being, but incarnated later and known in external history as the teacher of Pythagoras. Magoi is a Persian word, Hellenized in the gospel, to describe the disciples of the Zarathustra mystery school, the Zoroastrian initiate priests, who can read in the invisible processes of the stars what being it is who is incarnating. It's not an external constellation, as is often supposed, that they see. That's clear enough if you consider that the so-called star leads them to one particular house where they find the child. The mystery stream of Zarathustra is connected with one of the greatest leaders of humanity, who has many, many incarnations behind him, who was initiated 7 times in a row at the beginning of the post-Atlantean cultural evolution, and then finally incarnated in blindness as a special preparation. It's a whole complex series of events which lead down to the birth of the one Jesus child described in the gospel according to Matthew. And since that time, this being who then lived in the other body as well, in the body of the other child, from the 12th year of life until the age of 30, left at the moment of the baptism in the Jordan, and went the ways that a soul always goes when it dies, and has since then reincarnated frequently in every century even, and goes through the largely unwritten history hinted at merely in various legends under the name of Master Jesus, one of the great leaders of humanity, working more from the background than from the foreground. This is the being who prepares the exalted, luminous qualities of the thinking, of the human thinking and human marvel and enlightened cognitive life into which the Christ being will ultimately incarnate. Then as now. The second major current involves another great leader of humanity known as the Gautama Buddha. Buddha learns to feel the suffering of all of the beings of the world, escapes the seclusion of his childhood, which is given by his parents and by his own body, and goes out into the world and feels the pain of those who are sick and dying, and becomes the teacher of the faculty of compassion. This is the quality that shines from the soul forces of the child in the manger, in that grotto underneath the cliffs of Bethlehem, which moves the simple hearts of the shepherds. A deeply human quality of the middle of our very being. And this being does not incarnate before and does not incarnate after. And Buddha too ceases to incarnate on earth and learns to help from outside of the realm of the earth, but stays connected with the being of Christ and is long since a co-worker of Christ. And the third mystery stream, which is connected with the initiation of the will, is hinted at in the book of Revelation at the end of the New Testament, and more than hinted at, and also in the Gospel according to John. Christian Rosenkreuz is the traditional name for this great master of humanity who works usually in the background of history, but sometimes appears on the stage of world history as well, visible to the public. And in the Gospel according to John, it is said to Peter, the one chosen to lead the exoteric community of Christians, if it is my will that he, this mysterious leader of humanity, remain until my coming, how will that affect your task? That's a question posed to Peter. It's an open question, not simply a rhetorical question or a rebuke as it is often taken. That is, the will initiation of Lazarus, of the revelation, of the chemical wedding, and many other events before and after, makes this being the greatest martyr of humanity. That's an expression which Rudolf Steiner utters. It means that a path is forged, an opening is generated through which all of us can join in the sacrificial will to make something possible on earth right down into our deeds. Conscience and responsibility. And what happens there does not require that we ourselves become the world's greatest martyr and the greatest initiates and all of this. Even very partial steps are most helpful to the long-term process of the birth of Christ in the present humanity. And it's not restricted to humanity either. In the etheric realm, the birth of the Christ Son works in the being of the earth as a whole. This too is one of the elementary exercises in that astonishing book, How to Attain Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, Part 1. One of the first exercises given there is the seed exercise, where you can learn at a relatively early stage of your occult schooling to perceive something like an aura around a seed if it's a live seed capable of germinating. Something like a little flame. And this seed exercise applied on a cosmic scale means that the seeds that fall into the earth in autumn shine there now as tiny flames at this time of the year beneath the surface of the earth. The earth enters her winter state. She has withdrawn her earth soul into her inner being. That means she is now awake. And in this condition, she becomes maternal. The mineral earth unites with the life forces of the half-excarnated seeds, insect, eggs, and hibernating animals. She becomes a womb. The Archangel Gabriel governs the birth. Gabriel and Raphael and Uriel and Michael, these four great archangels, celebrate over the course of the year a cosmic sacrament. They take turns at the altar of the earth. They pass from one to the other what the being of the earth and the being of humanity are able to contribute to the continuing indwelling of Christ as the spirit of the earth. And at this time of year, Gabriel works in from the heights and Uriel from the depths. Seen from the cosmos, with the eye of the soul, the blue planet takes the appearance of the Madonna in the depth of winter. She is with child, and the child who is to be born is our own true humanity. And it's merely a short-sighted way of looking at it when we think that we already have humanity. An unbiased glance about us shows us it's a work in progress. At the turn of the ages, the Roman emperors, in their own way, attempted to appropriate the Christmas mystery. They adapted from Persian mystery cults of Mithras, the cult of the Sol Invictus, as he is called in Latin, the unvanquished sun, and placed it on the 25th of December. The Emperor Aurelian made that an official feast day in the year 274, before the empire had openly acknowledged its attempt to coalesce with Christianity. The first strategy was to replace it with something else. But this Sol Invictus goes back to the deep and true mystery cults from long before the turn of the ages. And you can still find beautiful mosaics and reliefs and coins showing a Christ-like figure with a halo imbued with rays, sometimes even in the form of a cross, like the later Christian icons of Christ. I didn't bring a picture, but you can find them easily if you look for them. The sun vanishes for our outer gaze in the depth of winter to a large extent, and reappears from beneath the earth, and from beneath the earth of the human subterranean secret which is in each of us. With the great leader of humanity, Lazarus John, moving in the background, the risen Christ has an encounter in the realm of the etheric, in the realm for which we are now beginning to awaken as the so-called second coming. And he has this encounter as early as the days after Easter, because some of the disciples were able to enter that realm. Galilee, it's called, or Shambhala, depending on your tradition. And in this conversation with Peter, which we mentioned before, described in the last chapter of the Gospel according to John, the evangelist moves in the background, Peter is in the foreground, Christ speaks with Peter, and he asks, "Do you love me?" This seems to summarize all that we have been trying to hint at tonight, more obliquely than directly, because it's hard to speak these things out. Christ asks, "Do you love me?" And that is really the question which we can hear. It's not even that difficult to hear. In every encounter with another person, with one of the least of our sisters and brethren, and also with one of the greatest. How do you even want to measure which one is least and greatest? This is a question which is posed to us by the Christ in the other, and which is posed to us by every child and by every person all the time, really. And it's only because the heart is too small that we cannot give an adequate yes every time. Peter struggles too. He answers something like a yes, but it's not really quite on the same level as the question that was asked. It's only a partial affirmation that he's capable of mustering up. And yet, every answer, however small, is welcomed and affirmed and taken up. And Peter is then given responsibility for the guardianship of humanity. Every time that he can manage a tiny fraction of a yes to this question. Thrice he is asked the question. The more detailed stages toward the ability to answer yes are awe, compassion, conscience. And that puts us in a position to become co-workers in the Christmas event of the present. The second coming does not mean that he went away and is coming back. It means that we went away and are coming back to the ability to perceive what is there all the time. And what is trying to happen and what needs our help to happen. All right, now you have been a patient and long-suffering internet audience. Perhaps there's something you would like to say or question or correct.
Daniel, thank you so much for your presentation. Dear friends, if you have a question, please type your name in the chat window and put a little Q. So for sake of order,
It says in the chat that they have Christmas carols right after Halloween. Peter Hodges, where did you hear that? Is that in America or are you in Canada there? That's true in Canada because they don't have Thanksgiving or they have it at a different time in October. But that would definitely be a...
I'm in Seattle.
Seattle, really? They have Christmas carols and maybe it's just my own personal Scrooge nature, but I despise some of those tunes. Don't you find them obnoxious? Okay, that's just my personal antipathies. That has no place here. Please forgive me. And you can't escape them. Zoroaster is the Greek word for Zarathustra, dear Barbara. I'm just reading the chat since no one's saying anything. Zarathustra is a Persian word and Zoroaster is a Greek version of it. Maureen is raising her hand.
Maureen is waving, yes.
Can you
Yes,
unmute
hi.
yourself, Maureen? There
Yeah.
should be a...
Now, can you hear me? I
Yes.
find it hard to disregard the pleas of the medical establishment from the whole world in order to realize the harmonic quality of the request that we distance and mask and stay away. I'm torn between those two realities because it's hard to see it as harmonic without involving an indictment of every human being who is begging us to do this.
That's independent of whether it's medically necessary or justified. Everything which masks the face and disconnects the human warmth and outlaws singing is of course Ahrimanic. That doesn't mean it might not be completely necessary. That would be a separate question. And it is by no means the entire medical establishment which says it's necessary, but that portion of the establishment which is permitted to have FaceTime. So that would be a different topic. And I didn't mean to take a position here. It's a polarizing topic, of course. I merely wanted to characterize it's one of a series of many signatures where people feel a need for various reasons to encase themselves in armor, because people are becoming more sensitive. And you can notice how irritable people have become. Obviously, that's exacerbated by the permanent mask situation. But even before that, people are getting very thin-skinned, and that's not only a bad thing. That means that the second coming is beginning, it seems to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, Richard Halford, please unmute yourself. Richard?
Yes, could you kindly explain Master Jesus again?
Jesus is not simply the same thing as Christ. And that's one of those helpful things that Rudolf Steiner offers us. There's the human sheath that is offered to the incarnation of Christ, which grows up under the name of Jesus, and ultimately under two different Jesuses, one of whom dies in the 12th year of his life. The Master Jesus is a name for the I, for the individuality incarnated in that Jesus who died in the 12th year of his life, passed over into the other child, lived there for 18 more years, approximately, and died again at the baptism, died not in the usual way, but in such a way that the body was still alive because it was switched out. The eye was switched out with the great cosmic eye of Christ, which incarnates in the baptism by John in the Jordan. The human individuality who leaves the sheath of Jesus of Nazareth at the time of the baptism in the Jordan then proceeds to reincarnate and is one of the greatest initiates in humanity and one of the great leaders of humanity, mostly from behind the scenes. It is a reincarnation of Zarathustra. Most of the incarnations are unknown to outer history, but not all of them. Rudolf Steiner mentioned Johannes Tauler, who worked as a priest in Strasbourg in the 14th century. Tauler had an encounter with an anonymous friend of God from the Highlands, so he's called. And this friend of God went to confession with Tauler, but Tauler had the greatness of soul to realize, although I'm his father confessor, he is my teacher. He is the greater. And Tauler became his pupil. And after Tauler had been instructed by this anonymous master, he returned to his work as a priest, and the first homily that he gave after that caused the people to fall into a faint. Such was the intensity of transformation that he had gone through by the encounter with this master. Rudolf Steiner says that the anonymous friend of God from the Highlands is one of the incarnations of the Master Jesus, and that this master incarnates frequently because he has reached a level where he doesn't need the long metamorphosis between incarnations which we usually require. Same is true of Christian Rosenkreuz. The two of them are between them always at work somewhere on earth.
Here is next question for Peter Hodges. Peter, please unmute yourself and ask a question. Peter? That's not Peter. Okay. Question from Nicolette Junior. Nicolette?
Hello, I'm here.
Yes, please.
I expressed some hesitation in asking the question, but because many of us are very active with anthroposophy, and there is a stream of thinking that I've come across and I haven't, really adopted as my own. I just hold the question, but it has been said again and again by one, it doesn't matter who, that Steiner is the Master Jesus. And I haven't sat that well, it's not for me to discard or to refuse or to adopt, but I wondered if this was an appropriate moment to bring that question forward, only because it's moving through the community as something that is true from somebody's personal research.
Oh yeah. It's pretty mysterious who Rudolf Steiner is. The question has more layers than one might suppose. They did ask him that, actually. Some of those people had the nerve just to ask stuff like that. And he said no, but it's not quite as straight a no as you might suppose either. He said he was in purely spiritual contact with the Master Jesus, who at that time was incarnated in the Carpathians. I suppose that would be Poland, Romania. This mountain range spans a couple of different parts of Central Europe. On the other hand, there's another occasion where Rudolf Steiner said that this Master Jesus would teach people about the etheric reappearance of the Christ. And the anthroposophists at the time, not being obtuse, said, wait a minute, that's what you're doing. And in the lectures on the Gospel according to Matthew, some of the people in the audience had the impression this Master is speaking to us right here and now. And there they asked him the same question, and this time he said yes. But this time he said, yes, but don't take that personally. An enigmatic answer. I take it to mean he's a collaborator, and these beings work through one another and with one another. And at certain times he's saying things to us which are really passed on from some of his colleagues, to put it in a trivial sense. But that doesn't mean that he personally is the Master Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can rule that out on the most direct personal level because of other things that he said about his identity in some of his private letters, and hinted at in some of his lectures to the members of the Anthroposophical Society.
Thank you. I think too, it's a mystery that deserves pondering, but I wonder partly, again, if he led us towards this and said to Ita Wegman, or maybe it was Marie Steiner, but to not think only of incarnation, but incorporation.
Yes.
So that's where the mystery of the layers, I think,
Yes.
lies. And I think we rush to the finish line and we think of him as the incarnated ego, as opposed to these incorporated layers that are working through him and in him. Like even the mystery dramas came through, and the last two were but along those lines. But thank you for letting me ask the question.
Yes, those are helpful remarks. Thank you, Nicolette.
Thank
Here's
you.
here's a question or comment from Sandra Whale. Sandra, please.
And people are asking questions in the chat too, Andre. I don't know how
Yeah,
to,
I just,
but
I'm
you will
just
tell
trying
which
to,
one is when.
That's where he's getting.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh, okay, good, good.
exactly.
So, so Daniel, I am astonished and delighted by just the way you're bringing information forward. You really kept my attention more than usually happens for me. And I have bookmarked the Google search page of your videos. So just saying, but that's not my question. I heard you kind of in passing say something about being thin-skinned, and which normally means kind of more, maybe more irritable and more easily offended.
Yes.
But I thought I heard you say, and here's my wondering, that to the effect that, here's my translation, this is what I wrote in my question. So being thin-skinned might mean that we are more permeable, more available to experience Christ in the etheric, because you kind of indicated that. You put those two together. So I'd love some clarification around how those.
Yes, I think so. That's how I see it, Sandra.
Okay,
I mean, I don't want to say it's great, be as irritable as you can possibly be.
no.
I notice people are easily annoyed nowadays.
I certainly
Of course,
am.
that
I really
it's
feel
partly
it.
because you can't plan anything anymore. You don't know whether the flight is really going to happen or not, and all these other things. But just in general, even before the anti-infection measures were put into place, people were becoming sensitive and sometimes hypersensitive, and not only against foodstuffs.
Mm-hmm.
There's an opening of delicate organs which are beginning to be perceptive for dimensions of reality which were always there, but which we needed to block out for a couple of millennia in order to come to our ownness. And now the challenge is, can I maintain that self-responsibility while at the same time opening more fully to the other beings around me? That seems to me to be an evolutionary process, which is not without its pain.
Okay. So that thin-skinnedness is kind of indicative of a kind of a permeability or a kind of an opening, and which, of course, could be considered a positive.
Yes, at least some versions of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it can easily go off into pathological versions as well, and it would be good if we could be so resilient that we don't have to freak out every time someone says something odd.
I think that's part of the times that we're in, the closeness to pathology. I think we're closer. I am. I feel like I'm on the edge many times, you know. But that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yes, dear Sandra.
Yeah, next question from Amy Slate Floyd. Amy, please unmute yourself.
I was actually making an observation, which I'm happy to make more verbally here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So I was just saying that I was appreciating how you were describing that loss of Christmas spirit as also kind of an opportunity to ditch the kitsch and maybe discover the newer, a different relationship to Christmas. I mean, we have, instead of the tradition, we have now the opportunity to have a personal relationship with, you know, outside of tradition, whatever we grow with our like-minded people or just in our own hearts. So I was appreciating you saying that this potentially sad quality of losing the Christmas spirit also has this potential for opening up a new relationship to it. And I was relating that also to the possibility that maybe this blatant outward distancing, I mean, many people are reporting that it's giving a surprising sense of connections in a different way. So I guess I'm experiencing a little bit of awe that something like a negative has all these unexpected fruits. And I remind myself a lot that that when the birth of Christ, of the Jesus child happened, for those who knew what it might mean, there was a lot of joyful anticipation. And then we have this picture of the Madonna who's pondering these things in her heart and who carries throughout the whole life of Jesus an understanding of the sorrows, and to be there at the foot of the crucifix, the cross, and still holding space for all these things. I think that's a really awesome picture that I'm trying to carry now in the time when all these terrible things seem to be happening. So that's
Yes.
not really a question, but an offering, I guess.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ditch the kitsch. Are you guys writing this down? You heard it here first. Amy Slate.
Next is our friend, which is named TD. TD, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's see here if I can start the, there we go. Thank you so much.
Now we see
So
you.
first of all, my gratitude to you for this presentation, and some of the information you've given has literally taken my breath away. So my question is, if you would please speak about the 12-year-old physical child that then went on to live for the next 20 years with the Christ consciousness. That physical body had already to be of an incredible crystalline structure to be able to receive that consciousness. So if you would speak as to a child, where did he come from? How was he born? Or what was his lineage? Or how was he maintained in that vibration? Thank you.
The lineage, there are two different lineages given in the Gospels. Both go back to King David, and the one is the royal line of the firstborn son of the firstborn son. It is from this line that the child descends in whom Zarathustra is incarnated. The other line, the other lineage is given in the Gospel according to Luke. King David had many children, and it does not pass through his firstborn. This does not pass through King Solomon, but through one of his lesser known children, Nathan. And this other genealogy is also astonishing in that it's given backward. It starts with Jesus and works backward. He was the son of Joseph, and it goes all of the way backward beyond David and beyond Abraham, which is where Matthew starts with the bodily specialization, all the way back to Adam, and beyond Adam to God. It concludes, and he was a son of God. So that there's an upward movement into the heavenly realm in the Gospel according to Luke. That's the other child. In this child, a soul was born which was not even endowed with an eye in the normal sense. It was a part of the original soul of humanity from before the fall, from the time of paradise. Adam Kadmon is what the Hebrew occultism calls it. The medieval tradition of the Kabbalah speaks of Adam Kadmon, which means something like Adam from the time before, man from the time before, or it could also be translated from the area beyond the east. From the time when the original world, plant, animal man was a oneness, and the different realms of nature had not been cast out of our being, and we had not entered into this separateness, which is characterized in the language of the creation story of Genesis as the fall. something of the original soul had been preserved from the Luciferic influence and conserved by occult practices in the so-called mother lodge of humanity over the course of many millennia. It is the sister soul to that human I being which came down first in the hardening and was able to survive the very most hardening period of before the separation of the moon. I'm using these anthroposophical terms because I know that many of you study these things. That is to say, the oldest I, which has been incarnating for the longest time on earth, reappears at the turn of the ages and is born of old parents as John the Baptist. This child does not stir in the womb. The forces of old age are too predominant until the 6th month, which is later than normal. And in the 6th month, the other child visits this child. Both of them are still in the womb. The so-called visitation, when Mary comes to see her cousin Elizabeth, causes the child in Elizabeth's womb to leap because those two are part of one and the same being. There is a resonance. The being born in the Mary of Nazareth, in the simple family of the non-royal line, is this original soul being so innocent it has never touched the earth. That's because the Christmas mystery requires us to develop all the sides of our humanity. The earthly experience and the wisdom which can only grow through painful experience on the one hand, and the innocence and purity on the other hand, need to come together to prepare for the being of Christ. There is a saying in Jewish mysticism, when the two become one, the Messiah will come. And there's a meditation image that goes with this saying, a triangle with its base in the earthly realm and its point up toward the heavens, and another triangle with its base in the heavens and its point tending down toward earth. They interpenetrate and form one unified six-pointed star. And this goes along with the saying, when the two become one, the Christ will come. And perhaps that could be applied to the mystery of these two children. They needed to become one. But humanity needed to specialize and to prepare these things from different backgrounds for that to happen. When the simple child is 11 years old, in the 12th year of his life, he reaches a point where he can no longer develop, there being no I in this being. He would probably have been put in some kind of institution for the developmentally handicapped in today's day and age. But according to the extra biblical legends and the apocryphal gospels and all of these other things, this was a child who had a deep faculty of compassion and an ability to speak and understand all of the animals, to speak the language of the animals and to understand the animals, grew up in the woods. Nazareth was at that time just a tiny village, really a lay colony of the Essenes, and was able to help people, the adults as well, just by the way that he could listen and look into their eyes when they poured out their souls. They spoke to him about all of their worries and troubles, and he could heal them. These qualities were embodied in this child, but the child came to a limit, and that's why the other child had to die, and the eye of the royal child, with its rich earthly experience, passed into the innocent child of the forest. The royal child, in the meantime, had also moved to Nazareth after the flight to Egypt. The whole thing is exceedingly complicated. That's why the parents, when they lost their child for a few days, were not simply overjoyed to find him again, but frightened because they saw he has suddenly become the teacher of the teachers, and that's not the child we knew before. The mystery occurs at the time of Passover, when an innocent lamb is sacrificed in the realm of the temple, in the hidden regions of the temple. There's a gap of 3 days, which the Gospels only hint at, where it's not directly told what happens between those two children. But after that, there's only one child, and in this child, both currents work together in a beautiful human form, which in the course of time will become the bearer of the Christ. That's not a complete answer, but it's at least part of one.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff Burnoff is next. Jeff, could you please unmute yourself?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the quite wonderful presentation. It seemed that the like the conclusion of your presentation or the heart of the presentation had to do with the question that Christ asked Peter at the end of the John Gospel, with Lazarus John sort of standing in the background. The question of, do you love me? Would it be possible for you to elaborate on that? He asked him that question 3 times, and I don't recall, there was different answers, but would you be able to sort of elaborate on that scene?
Yeah, the question is not exactly the same either. The first question is, do you love me more than all else? It's sometimes translated more than these other people, but I think that's a mistranslation. And that's an extraordinary claim or a challenge. Peter answers, yes, Lord, you know that I hold you dear, which does not rise to the same level. Greek has different words for love. And the Greek word agape, here as a verb, agapao, means the love with which we further the becoming of another being. Selfless love that affirms the being of the other and enables the being of the other to unfold. And Peter answers with a verb phileo, which is related to philia, one of the other Greek words for love, which means, you're my friend, I like you. It's a sympathy, it's a soul level sympathy, and not the deep spiritual love of self-sacrifice, which was implied in the question. Nevertheless, Peter's response, yes, I like you, little though it measures up to the real question, enables him to receive a task as a steward of the becomings of the community of Christians. Pasture my lambs. Then the question is scaled down, do you love me? And the third time the question is scaled down even more, do you like me? And that's when Peter is finally shaken, and when he's only asking, do you like me? Peter gives essentially the same answer each time. And each time he receives a new task. I'm not sure if I'm meeting your question with this. I'm just repeating what's in the book.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Andrew Linnell is next. Andrew, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Daniel. This has been wonderful. My question is actually quite similar to Sandra's and also has a bit of Amy Slate's in it. As you know, human evolution progresses. We are in a time that is sort of the mirror of when the etheric body sort of formed itself inside the physical, and now it's beginning to loosen again. And I'm curious, this for me is similar to this thin-skinned that you were referring to. And as a sort of necessary step for us to come to our new appearance of the Christ. But he also talks about, Steiner that is, about a new Christianity. I don't know if, obviously that's probably a whole nother talk, if not a whole week's worth of talk about the new Christianity. But in the Christ, in the etheric, I think we get a sense that, yes, it's going to be quite a different Christianity. And I don't know if you want to, if you take that up and elaborate on it.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it is what you said at the beginning about the loosening of the etheric body is very much akin to what Sandra and Amy were saying. I agree. Yes, what would the new Christianity have to look like? That's maybe not just a question to me, but to all of us. Maybe we could say it would have to reckon with the age of the consciousness soul in which each individual takes responsibility for his own thoughts and actions. So it can no longer be dogmatic. You must believe this, that, and the other, nor prescriptive. You must live in this according to this codex, as essentially all religions hitherto have been. That's a drastic new thing, and it's those of us who work with the Christian community and try to develop some rudiments of something new notice very quickly how hard it is to shake off those vestiges. You look for an authority figure who will tell you what to think and how to live. Be it your parish priest or some newfangled version of a bishop or something. That's the negative answer. We would have to get free of a whole lot of out-of-date trappings from the Roman cultural epoch or even from the Egyptian. But over and beyond that, it would have to be a real encounter and a conscious and free encounter with the present being of Christ. That would be religion in the original sense, connecting. That's a very vague answer because how it looks in practice, I suppose, exceeds my faculty of imagination. It could take many, many forms, and not necessarily those that we might expect. How do you connect? You could also ask, how do you connect with your friend? And if you try to be a friend of God or a friend of Christ, how do you connect with this being as a friend and collaborator? That's an open question for our moral fantasy and moral technique.
Thank you, Daniel. So Vivian is next. Vivian, please unmute yourself. Vivian?
Or Elia.
Hi.
Hi,
Thank
Vivian.
you. Hi, Daniel. Nice to see you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious about the statue and the mouth being not designed for eating, and this relationship to the etheric Christ and the return of the etheric Christ, or us becoming worthy of connection, of reconnection. And my question has to do with this sensitivity, the food sensitivities, all the food sensitivities, and these developing of the new capacities. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about the people that are claiming to be moving into a place where they're not eating, like Christian Rosenkreutz. The stories about him say that nobody's seen him eating, say, as Comte de Saint-Germain, or some of the other characters, the stories that I've been able to find. And I wonder if we're moving in a kind of direction. And then there's the Life from Light book. And I'm trying to rectify it in myself because I have a lot of food sensitivities, and it's almost like my body doesn't want to eat, but I'm hungry. And so I feel like I have a very simple diet, but I don't have the skill and the capability to make that next leap. I find I'm wondering if you could shed any thoughts on that, or what your thoughts are, your intuition is about this place we're in humanity.
That's an advanced level when we no longer need to eat. If the Christ being is at that level, it doesn't mean we have to get there by next week.
Yeah.
Christian Rosenkreuz goes through an incarnation in the, is it the 14th century or the 13th century, where he no longer, where he becomes transparent, indicating that already in his incarnation as Lazarus, something of his physical body is transformed. Beginnings of spirit man are developed. That's very advanced. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be people who are beginning to develop that today as well. And certainly there are people who eat very little. And certainly nutrition is an extremely individual feature. I think all of the general dogmas are harmful in that sense. Some people just don't do well without meat, and some people don't do well with it if they have meat, or can think more clearly if they don't eat meat, and so on and so on. I suppose really a good anthroposophical physician would be worth talking to about questions like that, because that goes into the questions of the sheath nature as well. It's not simply a religious question. I think I saw the name of a good anthroposophical physician on the chat, among the participants here too. Dr. Rentia is here, if I saw her right. And there are others as well. You can look around and find them and ask them too. I would recommend that for the personal question.
Thank you.
I know a woman who tried to make the transition to nourishment merely by light. And she died in the process of trying to make this transition. So it's not just a harmless thing. You have to see what's happening. But it should essentially be possible even now, just even for people who eat normal steak and potatoes type meals, to notice that the nourishment does not only pass through the mouth and the throat, but that there's also a type of nourishment which comes from the breathing. And Rudolf Steiner speaks of even of a third current which comes through the sense perception, that actually nourishes a part of us, that the sense perceptions nourish our lower being, lower in the bodily sense, our metabolism and limb organization. And the breath organism is nourished by the breath and rhythmical organization is nourished by the breathing. And it's primarily the head and the nerve sense processes of degeneration in the body, which are nourished by eating and drinking. So even at our present stage, the nutrition process is much more complicated than you might think. It would be great to have some of the physicians talk about this. I'm sure they do talk about it from time to time. I just miss out on it usually. Those are mysteries, and those are very individual. Was that Elia's question? I thought you said Elia was raising his hand.
Yeah, Elia, please. It's a raised hand for a long time. Elia?
Yeah, I just wanted to I want to thank you for your contributions, Daniel, and I wanted to bring it back around and focus it, it's kind of like asking you a question too, but in relationship to the lectures in the Christmas conference on world history in the light of anthroposophy, I felt that what Rudolf Steiner was giving us were like an open door to create the path that he had traveled from 5000 BC, up to the present, along with Ida Begman, and that what was developing between the two of them was agape, and that he left clues to discover other incarnations of his individuality in the mystery dramas, and then elsewhere in his lecture cycles. In fact, he said that even when he gave out the lectures on world history, that it actually started with the lectures in 1910 on occult history. And the reason I kind of bring it up is it's kind of a question to you, that if many of these, if they become unconcealed, they can be an incredible contribution to what anthroposophy can be in a new way to many anthroposophists. And I'm just wondering, if you had any ideas about that, or did any of that research work yourself.
I agree, Elia, with your description. That's a helpful description.
Anything else, Daniel, or we can pass to next person?
No, I agree with Elia.
Okay. All right, next person is Lori Ann Skachko. Lori Ann.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my question is in regard to the willing aspect of the threefold.
I can't hear you too well, Lori. Could you say it again?
Yes, my question is in regard to the willing aspect of the threefold.
The willing aspect of what?
Of the threefold composition of the representation of man. What is a sensing willing?
What is it that is?
A sensing willing.
Maybe the will is not primarily there for sensing, but for doing.
But how do you do in a way that allows the etheric Christ to come through?
There's this expression, conscientious. If you take your responsibilities seriously, and you know that it matters, then that's already the beginning of a working out of conscience. Do I do something because I have to, or to avoid a penalty? Or do I do something because I know it to be something I want to do, because I love the deed?
I think we have to. And that's not the consciousness pole. That's not the.
Of course, there's an evolution when we bring consciousness into our will and do not act out of instinct or habit merely. But you can have the most exalted consciousness and great, glorious wisdom and still be totally useless to all the other people if you don't stand up and help them once in a while. That's why the human unfolding would be incomplete if the will realm didn't enter in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michael Ronell is next. Michael, could you please unmute yourself? Michael Ronell.
I've unmuted myself, but my hand was not up. Thank you anyway. I have no
Thank you for unmuting yourself.
question.
And
What?
everyone, always remember to unmute yourself. Just in general in life, it's a good thing.
Sometimes not. Anyway, I'll mute myself at this point.
Michael, what is your question?
I have no question. I do not know why you thought I had a question.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Paul and Joanne. Question from Paul and Joanne.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Thank you, Daniel, for the lecture. It was
Hi,
wonderful.
Paul. Hi,
Hi.
Joanna.
Daniel, thank you.
Well, I had a question about when we talk, I'll just read my question here since it was coherent. When we talk about Christ in the etheric, do we mean Jesus Christ? And then could you follow that up with a few words of interest about Jesus Christ? Because we've already talked about Master Jesus, and then I thought maybe a few more about Jesus Christ, maybe in particularly in relation to the etheric.
We have the earthly stream preparing to receive the cosmic being of Christ and producing Jesus. We have the cosmic being of Christ pre-existent, involved in the creation of the cosmos from the very beginning of time and from before that. And finally, approaching the earth and incarnating in the human sheath of Jesus. We have to distinguish between these two. However, once the incarnation really sets in a narrower sense with the baptism and those few months that follow it up until the crucifixion and resurrection, the two are no longer really fully distinguished, are they? They become one. Therefore, we can speak after the resurrection of the Christ Jesus as well, or Jesus Christ. Whether you say Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus is perhaps a pedantic matter. You could say the one emphasizes the one side and the other side, and the first of the two names is used more adjectively, but I wouldn't want to quibble about those differentiations. The Christ Jesus, the Jesus Christ, is now a unity. It is a being who is divine and human, both at the same time.
Okay, that's
So
new
then
to
we
me.
have, yes, go
I
ahead.
was not aware that the connection was that totally intimate at that point, especially for the Christ being that he's with Jesus, totally connected.
Become one.
Yeah, become one.
The Gospels speak of the encounters with this being after the resurrection as encounters with Jesus. They say Jesus. And it seems that's not just sloppiness on their part. The wounds are there. The hands are there. God has become man. And that's why the Christmas event is continuing in connection with us and with our humanity, and does not leave humanity to become more of a spherical, diffuse light cloud or whatever other non-terrestrial being you may wish to picture, but remains human now as well. In the time of the second coming, he does not incarnate in a human physical organism, but incorporates in the etheric organism of a being of the rank of the angels. Nevertheless, we can still speak of the humanness, and people who have had Christ encounters in recent decades usually speak of this as in some way a human being, although clearly an unusual one, to put it mildly.
Hi, thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Dear friends, we are already working for 2+ hours, and I think we have to set some limits. Daniel, how do you feel? 10 minutes more?
Sure. How many people are still waiting to say something?
I believe it's still about 6 or 7 questions.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Carola wants to know about 5,700 AD. You have to explain that yourself, Carola. How do you get this mathematics? David says, yeah, of course, David. I don't know if everyone is reading the chat here. That the irritability and the other disturbances have to do with the opening into etheric being when we experience it subconsciously and don't take it up and work with it consciously. That's a remark by David Kavish in the chat. I would certainly affirm that. I don't know if David wants to say something about that. Carola asks about us becoming developmentally handicapped, but I'm not sure I understand your question, dear Carola. Maybe you would have to explain that one.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. What I meant by that is that when women will no longer give birth to humans because of the evolutionary process that's going to happen in the future, and the developmental stages will become shorter and shorter for humans. We will get to a stage where we'll only become 12 or so.
Yeah.
How do we then are we then developmentally disabled, just like the Jesus of Nazareth was? Just in a different sense, he's from, from above, he's from the heaven, but I don't know if we will get to that point at that time.
Personally, I consider myself developmentally disabled right now.
Well, yeah.
I don't have to wait until the 6th millennium. I think that all of us have our developmental challenges, but the constitutional issue that you're addressing is going to be all-encompassing. Everyone will stop evolving at an earlier and earlier age. And this has already been going on for some time now. We don't evolve naturally for as long as we used to. That is what Rudolf Steiner calls the process of becoming younger. Humanity as a whole becomes younger.
Mm-hmm.
However, that doesn't mean that development is impossible. It means we have to take it up consciously, as David puts it. We can still keep developing until we're 100 years old and older. But we have to do it and will it. It doesn't just happen to us that we mature simply by existing. Up until the age of maybe 26, we still mature just by existing. But after that, you can stagnate and remain stuck at the inner age of 26 if you don't do anything for your own inner development. And in the future, when that goes all the way down into puberty, it's a question of reproducing in a different way through conscious inner development. That will be very profound. The farther things go, the less things are given and the more we have to achieve them. I think that's the basic principle.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I love it.
Thank you, Carola.
Okay.
All right, some people have written private things in the chat, and I don't know if I'm fast enough to answer them all before Andre cuts this all off. I'm not even sure how to answer them. Oh, goodness.
Daniel, here is one question from Sandra Vale. Did you find it in the chat? Judith von Halle is apparently one of the beings who don't need eat food because of being nourishment spiritually. So it's a statement, it's not a question. So any comments on it, Daniel?
Yeah, in general, people with the stigmata do not eat much, or sometimes they eat nothing. That's been known since the Middle Ages. Rudolf Steiner merely remarked that sometimes these stigmata are a pathological thing and sometimes they're healthy. And you would have to judge that in each individual case. They're always connected with supersensory faculties of perception. Maybe it's possible to feel something of the quality. Is that an etheric quality of perception or a densified physical imagination? I have my questions there in this particular instance that's being mentioned, but I think that's a topic for another meeting. Would be wrong just to try to categorize that too rapidly, I think.
Well, yeah. Dear friends, I think we are done. It's no more questions in my chat window. Yeah, last chance. Let's take one last question, and we will release dear Daniel because it's late evening in Nuremberg, Germany.
Daniel?
Yeah.
This is David Kavish.
Hi, David.
This is not so much a question as I think it's important to point out something that in one way is trivially evident to everybody who's listened to this, but also is something which I think we tend to overlook, which is that you have spoken, and Steiner talked about new ways of speaking and new ways of hearing have to be developed. And I think for many of the people just hearing what questions came to mind, what they took in from you spoke to them livingly. And each individual felt that you were speaking directly to them, that it was actually doing something. It was having a living effect on them, not just taking in information. And I think, this is the communicating in the etheric. And I think sometimes we think that's going to be too something that we can't experience. But I think we are actually experiencing that today, where people have gotten answers to questions they've been carrying, or they've gotten questions, which is sometimes more important than answers. And I don't want the event to come to an end without pointing that out. And it's always such a pleasure to be with you, even remotely. So thank you.
Thank you, dear David, for the encouragement. It's very dear of you.
Daniel, can we take one more question from Tom?
Yes. Yes.
Tom, go ahead.
Daniel, thank you for your presentation today. My question, we speak of Christ in the etheric, and you and I, as men, we have a feminine etheric body. What is the etheric body of Christ? Can we relate that to Sophia?
Yes.
I've asked this question for years, decades now. Yeah. Is Christ in the etheric
female
expression of Sophia? We have not lost Christ, we've lost the wisdom of Christ, the Sophia of Christ.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tom. I would add the further question. What is the gender of the physical body of Christ? I don't want to shock you or anything, but those pictures that I was showing before, if you cover up the right or the left side, you get a very different picture. That's half female, half male. And I don't want to take that in the crudest sense of the word, but it must be that something of this separation principle of the sickness of sin from the fall from paradise is healed by the incarnation of Christ, even as early as the turn of the ages. And we must not think that physical body, after the 3 years, 2.5 years of indwelling of the Christ Son, was simply the same as another physical body, just a little bit friendlier and gentler with Birkenstocks. It's not that simple. The saliva could heal deafness. The touching the hem of his garment could heal a hemorrhage of blood. There are all kinds of mysteries to the physical body itself, which by the time of the crucifixion was probably in a state that had largely healed the split of the sexes. And maybe the longing in our day to overcome this so-called binary sexuality, although perhaps not always healthy, is partly also a sense that there must be more to me than just my gender identity. And I think in that sense that the question that you raised about the physical, about the etheric, applies as well. It applies to the physical as well, and it applies to the etheric as well. And I personally, I say he when I speak about God or Christ or something, not because I'm convinced that is a one-sidedly masculine being, but just because it sounds too inanimate to me. The Turkish have a word that means he or she or both, but not it. As far as I'm aware, we lack such a word in English. They, I find unsatisfying. That's the current vogue, because then the individuality is a little bit lost when you say they.
Yes.
If anyone wants to, they can raise their hand. It doesn't satisfy me, but maybe I'm too old-fashioned there. But certainly it helps to bear in mind these things are not simple. This being is not a simple one-sided version of humanity, but an all-encompassing version. I
Thank
think
you.
that's the main idea behind your question, if I understood you right.
I think so. It's hard to distinguish Christ from Sophia. If you will, Sophia is an aspect of Christ. We speak of the feminine face of God, even as a definition of Sophia, and the wisdom of Christ, where Christ is the power of creation. Sophia is the wisdom behind the power, if I'm making sense. It's hard to talk about them separate from each other.
Yeah. Yes.
Dear friends, I think it's good time to thank our dear Daniel for outstanding presentation. And I would like to invite you for our presentation tomorrow, which is presentation of Andrew Linnell. And next presentation on Monday, it's presentation from Craig Wiggins. And after Craig, it will be Peter Selk on December 30th. Please stay tuned, and thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.
For hosting it.
Thank
Will you
you,
be posting
Daniel.
the recording online?
Yes, it's recorded.
Good.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Great to
Thank
see
you,
you
Daniel.
all.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Mom.
Gute Nacht. Gute Nacht.
Thank
you. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Gute Nacht.
Daniel.
Hola.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see your parents as well.
Yes.
Thank you,
Good for me.
Daniel. This was wonderful.
Yes.
Looked like
Yates.
straight from Columbus.
Mm.
Isn't that from
Oh,
Columbus?
yes. Uh-huh. Hello.
Hi.
Hey, Marianne. Hi, Burley.
Yeah, hello. Good to see you again. And your dad too.
Yes.
And mother.
Yes.
Many thanks.
Oh, I'll be there. Hello, Amy. Well.
Somebody thought earlier.
Good.
He needs to
Dear
unmute
people
himself.
out there. Hi, Victoria.
I see Burley Tanner.
Is that, yeah,
Hello.
hello, Amy. Thank you for your comments. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel, will a recording be available of your
talk.
It is my understanding that Andre has recorded the whole thing. If I can, I'll check it for blatant errors and maybe post little corrective subtitles if necessary, but then it should be posted online at some point.
Yes,
guess-
yes. It's all very
Good.
recorded. Yes.
Do they have to write to you, or how do they find the link, Andre?
Yeah, I can send upon request, John Steven. Just shoot me email, please.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Good.
Thank you.
Where is Iroquois Valley?
It's based in Evanston, Illinois, and it supports organic farmers around the country.
Good for you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
You're welcome. Thank you. Farmland says.